Our videos touched on different time periods, continents, and countries. But there's one we've left out, the Ottoman Empire, except for the Janissaries. Right, today we will learn about the history of the Ottoman Empire, the capture of Constantinople and the subsequent fall. Why and for what Suleiman got the nickname the Magnificent. How powerful was the Ottoman Empire and what is its history in general? Make yourself comfortable right now. We will answer all the questions, except perhaps the most important one, for how the Ottoman Empire was formed. No one knows. And anyone who says they do is lying. The problem was best presented by Cullen Miller, a doctor of Turkish studies. He clearly explained that the origins of the Ottoman Empire are a black hole where fairy tales are mixed with reality, and any attempt to fill this black hole leads to another fairy tale. Why is this so? Because the first written and not literary records about the formation of the early Ottoman Empire appeared in 1476, 23 years after the fall of Constantinople, and the Porto state itself appeared somewhere in 1299. That is from indirect sources and data we know that the state of Porto, the ancestor of the Ottoman Empire, was already then. For example, in Byzantine manuscripts the Battle of Osman I with the army of Byzantium in 1301 is noted, but directly Ottoman historical records appear only centuries later, and therefore, to judge the history of the emergence of the Ottomans on the continent can only be based on fragmentary and indirect sources. And the picture is that Asia Minor has always been fun. Somewhere between the 10th and 13th centuries there were enough worries, and without crusades from Central Asia, Turks moved in, different currents of Islam formed a state and gnawed at each other. But in the end the Seljuk Empire came on the arena. It consisted of the guys whose ancestors lived on the territory of modern Kazakhstan. At least, the leader of Seljuks was born there, from which the Seljuk Turks got their name, and at the same time the lands of the Byzantine Empire, which they conquered year after year. This went on until 1243, when the Mongols knocked on the backyard of the Seljuks themselves. It is not hard to guess that the Sultan became a vassal of the Mongol Khan, and the Seljuk state split into a bunch of areas of the so-called beyliks, which gnawed among themselves for power. And here in one of such beyliks and drew Mr. Osman I, which roots, according to legends, went to the Turks from the same Kazakhstan or Iran. Beylik Osman took off and rattled the nerves of even Byzantium, as well as neighboring Beylik, which actively joined. At this point it is important to realize two things. First, this was not yet the Ottoman Empire, if only because it would be named after Osman much later. And second, the importance of Osman himself is also exaggerated. Yes, under Mongol influence he declared the independence of Beylik, but we should not forget that in many respects the Ottoman Empire owes its emergence to the Mongols. In the first place, as we have already mentioned, they defeated the Seljuks, and in the second place, ironically, they stopped further raids on the territories of Anatolia, considering them Byzantine, and Byzantium was an ally of the Mongols. The heirs of the Roman Empire and the Turks did not control anything, and this information did not reach the Mongolkans and allowed the Ottoman Beylik to gain power, although initially it was quite average by the standards of other beyliks and far from the most bellicose. The matter is in flexible system of management and in weakness of Byzantium. In the first place, even 200 years before the fall of Constantinople, the empire did not really control the territories on the borders with the Turks, in general and with the Ottomans in particular. This led to the fact that the Greeks left the cities and, for example, the city of Thebes, which served as the capital of Osman's father, took without a fight, and even with a large number of Greek Christians, who on their own will went to the Turks. You ask why? In the first place, the guys logically feared raids and offered cooperation, which the Ottomans accepted. Well, and in the second, weakening Byzantium strangled the Christians with taxes, which the Ottoman Beylik at first did not have at all. Such episodes of transition of Greek villages and peasants without a fight dozens, if not hundreds. But as the territory increased, the Ottoman Beylik began to adopt fashionable European trends. The inhabitants were taxed, and infidel Christians were recognized as second-class citizens, and all those who criticized the Turks in cruelty and cunning at this point should understand they did not invent something new. The Ottoman Empire, in its first step, simply copied what the Europeans were doing, and when the Greeks living in the territory of Beylik started to realize something, it was too late. Some fled, some tried to revolt, but the majority accepted Islam. Moreover, many accepted it even at a time when Christianity was not infringed upon by the Ottomans. By the way, even now there are ethnic Greeks living in Turkey. You ask, and what happened next? Unless the Ottomans hated the Byzantines, the Greeks often acted as umpires in their disputes, intermarried and resorted to fantastic methods of diplomacy. But time after time this was accompanied by further losses of Greek territories, not always bloody. The choice remained the same as before: embrace Islam and all will be well. Don't want to? One way or another, the Ottoman Empire is knocking on your door. Just as Christianity itself once knocked on Europe's door by taking the Roman Empire. Except that, unlike the Roman Empire, with the succession to the throne, the Ottomans acted extremely cautiously. Yes, usually a son or relative became the new ruler, but there was no clear system, and the heir had to first show his intelligence to all the commanders and elders, and idiots were rarely allowed to the throne at first. However, a little later the story came down to the fact that each new sultan killed all his brothers so that no one but him would claim the throne. This end allowed the Ottomans to slowly but surely defeat Byzantium, and at the same time that, unlike the defeated Europe, this empire acted with a single mind and with a clear central authority. Osman's son Orkhan swept through the western territories with fire and sword. Having reached Serbia and Bulgaria, he also laid the foundation for the famous Janissaries, recruited from 1,000 Christian children, and he also created the post of chief vizier, the Sultan's aide. Orkhan's brother Aladdin, who seemed to be a pretender to the throne, was to blame, and by appointing him vizier to birds were killed at once, and the position proved useful in the future. Sultans, often dealing with affairs in the west, knew that in the capital, and if necessary, and in the east, the vizier will deal with everything. Thus by 1460 the Ottomans had taken the entire Balkan Peninsula, Asia Minor, and a little later neutralized the Republic of Venice, taking full control over trade in the Mediterranean. The first 150 years of the empire's life are often referred to as the Great Years. But after a while, Sultan Suleiman I came on the scene. Unlike Mehmed II, who captured Constantinople, and his father Selim, he turned out to be a peace-loving man. Being a perfectly educated and wise man, Suleiman first released many prisoners, established relations with Venice and quite suddenly with France. The fact is that by the beginning of the 17th century, the territory of the Ottoman Empire ran into Austria, which, unlike the defeated Greece and Bulgaria, did not surrender immediately. But Europe, as we mentioned, was a place of mud, feudalism and wars of all against all. France in 1517 tried to form an alliance against the Turks, but could not come to an agreement with her immediate neighbors, and the decision came suddenly. For the French King Francis I realized that besides the Crusades there was no reason to hate the Turks, and for the next 300 years the Ottoman Empire and France became allies. It should be noted that similar proposals to Suleiman made Spain, but France looked more promising, and as a result, with its support, the Ottomans seized half of Hungary, and the second, transferred to Austria, taxed. In parallel, using the vizier, were expanded possessions in the east. In general, opening any article about Suleimani, you can read what a pacifist and diplomat he was. But in reality, the magnificent Sultan conducted no less than 13 major wars. Pali, Egypt, Iraq, Kurdistan, almost all of northern Italy and, most importantly, Rhodes. This island was the last stronghold of the Knights of John, who preserved the traditions of Christianity. For 6 months Suleiman led a siege and eventually won, in fact, completely took over the trade in the Mediterranean Sea, but the peaceful achievements were also. Suleiman is generally called a legislator by the Turks, for under him a full-fledged code of laws, which was in force for 3 centuries, was passed. It prescribed the division of the population into groups. The Sharia and other religious topics were adapted to their time, and not the origin, but the abilities of people were put in the head. Suleiman generally valued justice, then in Turkish society earned love for years to come. It is worth noting that it is also about Christians. In the first place, they in power and the Ottomans were commonplace. There was only a narrow list of only Islamic professions. And secondly, despite the limited rights, Christians, landowners and artisans were much freer than their fellows in Christian Europe, so it is foolish to speak of any brutal oppression against the Ottoman Empire. But it is also foolish to consider Suleiman as an unambiguously positive sultan for the empire, for it was under him that the rudiments of the fall appeared. The annexation of new territories is great. The culture, which the sultan loved, is also great. Under him, for example, the second largest mosque was built, which to this day amazes with its beauty. Suleiman built schools, paid attention to science and, as he could, promoted intelligence in society, but chronologically the Sultan did not keep up. for the actually industrially developed part of the empire was the western part, with the Balkans and fresh conquests, while the central and especially the eastern part was preserved in the mores and habits of the great times, while the rest of Europe was developing in firearms, launchers, and new battle tactics. The Ottomans had all of these, but began to fall behind under Suleiman. And what is the most critical, to old age Suleiman was removed from the management of the state, and began to bicker for power, which for the empire does not end well. Also, Europeans were actively trading with the New World, found a bunch of bypass sea routes, and Ottoman money was depreciating. Russia was slowly rearing its head, another headache for the Ottomans. But from the 16th through the 17th centuries, there was still enough power to fend off the empire. There were even new conquests, which, however, stopped in 1683, when the army suffered a crushing defeat near Vienna in another attempt to conquer Austria. Technology was no longer enough. The country was by and large agrarian, and trade was largely practiced by non-Muslims, which was no good, and the Ottoman Empire forgot that it owed its successes to the personal qualities of its first 10 sultans. And like any giant, it began to be gobbled up by corruption and bribes. This power evolved, and under the guise of giving a vizier could buy almost any position, and the process began during the late reign of Suleiman, and the sultans often turned a blind eye to it. Constant campaigns and the army required money, and where they come from is not so important. And it turned out that the money came, but the progress remained somewhere far away. While the Industrial Revolution was rumbling in Europe, and the Ottoman Empire continued to be agrarian and lived by the laws of the ancestors, and the numerous army, Ottoman, military ingenuity and art could not cope with the banal progress. France remained an ally in the Crimean War, a great help, but the Ottoman Empire was already doomed to failure, for slowly the inhabitants of the industrial Balkan and Western territories began to revolt one by one, considering that they controlled a significant part of the empire's trade. There was nothing the sultans could do about it. In fact, from the end of the 19th century, the Ottoman Empire was already a corpse, and no matter how its fate turned out in World War I, such a state could not exist for long. Therefore, the appearance of the Republic of Turkey on the political arena is absolutely logical. But it is extremely illogical to call the Ottoman Empire a barbaric state and shooting Christians. As we have already mentioned, the empire treated Christians rather well, and paid more attention to science than medieval Europe. In particular, we owe the Ottomans the appearance and popularization of medical scalpels, forceps catheters, and other devices saving millions of lives. Suleiman adored poetry and art, so the museums of modern Istanbul contain incredible works. Yes, and on the Islamic world, the Ottomans had such an influence that no one can come close to it. They managed to keep on their territory several dozens of different nationalities and religions, and for 6 centuries the system worked. This is already a great indicator that the Ottoman Empire are not a failure. Moreover, most Renaissance historians called the Sultan a true heir to the Roman emperors, because the power in his hands was concentrated huge. Well, and on this we have, perhaps, everything. See you again, our historians.